Welcome back to Conversations. I'm Bill Kristol, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Garry Kasparov.
Well.
My Russian's not very good. Garry Kasparov, great chess champion, democratic activist, and thoughtful and perceptive analyst also of Russian politics and American politics and world politics. The last time we ended with the
Collapse of the Soviet Union.
that was a happy ending,
Yes, that was a great moment.
but the world doesn't stop with happy endings, right?
No,
History did not end.
Always goes in seasons. So that's why I call my last book "Winter is Coming."
Yes.
So just to warn people that we are entering another dangerous period.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful book, and I want to get to that, and I want to talk about what's happened over the last 25 years. But one of the most striking things, I think you mentioned this in your book, but you've written this elsewhere also, talking about Vladimir Putin. And you say, well, people say it's often said, he plays chess, he's very clever, and we in the West are just playing checkers. And you say that's a bad analogy. That's not the right way to think about Putin.
No, it is really bad, and I was always annoyed, hearing that Putin plays chess.
And this was not just because you played
Obama,
chess, right?
yes, and Obama or other leaders of the free world, they play checkers.
Right.
Yeah, I thought I had to defend the integrity of my game.
Good.
Because chess is not a game for dictators for numerous reasons. One, it's transparent. It's all information 100% available. So you know exactly what you have, you know exactly what your opponent has. Okay, you don't know what he or she is thinking, but you definitely know what kind of resources your opponent can use to hurt you, to damage your position. Also, chess is very much a strategic game. So you have to think long term. Dictators don't think long term. Dictators, especially who are in power for so long as Putin is, they have to work on the survival mode. Because it's all about today, maybe tomorrow morning. Just everything that helps to survive is good. Because the moment dictator thinks long term, he'll definitely miss guys from his own entourage hitting him in his back. The game that defines dictators much better is poker. Because it's about bluffs. It doesn't matter whether you have a strong hand or a weak hand. You can have a very weak hand, but if you're comfortable bluffing, raising stakes, and if you can read your opponents, and let's not forget, Putin is not a military dictator. He's not a military general. He's a KGB guy. And we have to give them credit. He's quite, shrewd KGB guy who could read his opponents. He proved it many times, dealing with, Bush 43, with other foreign leaders, that he could actually find a way of building communication and getting exactly what he wanted. And playing poker means that, you have to read your opponent. And today Putin knows that no matter, what kind of hand he has, the opposition, whether it's Obama or European leaders, they'll fold the cards. Syria was a classical example. This moment of Obama's infamous red line,
right.
Where what Putin had, a pair of 5. But he acted as if he had a royal flush. And Obama, even with a full house, just folded the cards. So it's very important to understand, that this is the dictators always operate short term, and democracies must operate long term because it's not about one individual who is currently running the country, whether it's president or a prime minister. It's about the success of the country. It's about the success of the system. It's about pressing our advantages, and they are strategic. It's lasting institutions that could make the difference, even when the president or a prime minister is no longer in the office.
Well, let's just go right to that since that's so interesting. I mean, but what about the problem then for the United States? We are more set up to play checkers or chess, maybe, but not poker. I mean, do you think it's a problem for Western democracies in combating someone like Putin? He has this intrinsic advantage.
No, but look, Putin hasn't come out of the blue, So it's not just Putin. That's why, again, in my book "Winter is Coming," I emphasized why Vladimir Putin and the enemies of the free world must be stopped. Because Putin is, you may call him, boss of bosses, capo di tutti capi. He's just, like a spider in the center of this web. Because Putin helps other bad guys, other thugs and dictators and terrorists, sort of to feel free to attack the free world, because they all know that unless they attack the free world, unless they attack the United States as the leader of the free world, they will have no credibility with their own people, because neither Putin nor Iranian mullahs nor Al-Qaeda's Islamic States or other Saxon dictators around the globe, they have nothing to offer but confrontation. They have to present themselves as the protectors of their own people against the world evil. And of course, they have to attack the world, the free world, that produces everything that, by the way, they use quite effectively against us. They cannot compete in innovations, they cannot compete in ideas, in productivity, but they can compete in something quite different. Because for us, each human life is unique. For them, killing 1,000 people, 100,000 people, 1 million, is a demonstration of strength and their macho qualities. So we should realize that they have no allergy for blood, and they will keep pressing their advantage. It's not that we have grown, that our enemies have grown stronger. It's our resolve that has grown weaker.
And the resolve is consistent with not becoming like Putin, right? I mean,
absolutely. It's since going back to the collapse of the Soviet Union, that was a absolutely unique moment in world history. And the United States was, at that time, was a lone superpower, and it could do literally everything. So there was a moment to start thinking long term, creating new institutions, the same way as Winston Churchill, Harry Truman, conceived and built institutions, after Fulton's speech, thinking long term. Because the entire infrastructure that helped America and the free world to win the Cold War was built in late 40s. In 91, 92, America had to think long term again. But, we had an administration, Clinton's administration, that was in a party mode.
So let's go through those administrations, since for Americans that's so interesting. I mean, what went wrong? What could we have done that we didn't do under first President Bush already? Do you think there was?
I think the first President Bush, was uncomfortable with these big changes because, he grew up, at the Cold War time, and he was quite scared about consequences of the collapse of the Soviet Union,
right.
Yeah, and collapse of the communist system. I mean, he didn't have enough imagination to see America, just changing the world dramatically, so making dramatic impact. I can hardly imagine him, just saying evil empire, in early 80s, because we all remember that Bush, right, among others, criticized Reagan for being so bold, so aggressive, because nobody could imagine that one day there would be no Soviet Union.
Right.
So suddenly Bush was presiding over one of the most grandiose moments in history, and he tried to play it safe.
Yeah.
Okay, I think the biggest mistake he made that actually led to many mistakes later on, it's the first Gulf War. Yeah. He had to take on Saddam, to remove Saddam. That could be a little bit of chaos, but in 91, 92, America, I think, was in the position to actually fix these problems.
Yeah.
So I think, 91, 92, later on with Clinton in the office, there were a few years, like a window of opportunity, when the United States could come up with some new ideas, like rebuilding United Nations.
To come back to Saddam for a minute, because I was in that administration, and I won't say that I saw that much in the future, but I thought to myself, I had the instinct that you cannot let the guy wage an aggressive war, destroy, kill people, burn the oil fields in Kuwait, and then the status quo, then you go back to the status quo ante. He pays
Yes.
no price, in effect. He's ruling the same. I mean, he lost some people, he lost some wealth, but
basically
he's still in power
Yeah.
in the same nation with the same borders that he had before. That seems to be a terrible signal. I think it had consequences. Don't you think Milosevic saw that in
Absolutely.
Europe and said, well, okay, you can launch an aggressive war and you don't get deposed. You don't end up in jail or
absolutely,
dead.
Absolutely. So it's America was not ready to exercise its role because it was American leadership that helped the free world to survive against communism onslaught and eventually to win the Cold War. But American leadership was required to start thinking long term, 10, 20, 25, 30 years ahead by rebuilding the world, by actually demonstrating that it was not just it's the end of history, the liberal democracy has won, but this is it's to have a vision, to show the vision of the future. And I think that's it. The lack of this vision and the fact that the Clinton administration was, very much concerned about domestic affairs and, enjoyed life because there were no threats.
Right.
People used to think that Clinton administration was one of the most successful. I mean, I have totally opposite view because you should not look at the. Now, let me use the chess metaphor.
Yeah.
You should not look just at the final position. when Clinton left the office, America was still, superpower. But just remember what's happened when he entered the office. So what happened from 1992 to year 2000? In 1992, now nobody argues. America was all powerful and could do many great things. We don't want to spend too much time thinking, arguing about it. I believe that rebuilding the United Nations and actually coming up with something more like a league of democracies and imposing these values. I mean, just forcing other countries just to accept that it's not just lip service, that they have just to follow the rules and regulations and respect human rights. Now in 2000, when Clinton at the end of technically 2001, but Al Qaeda was ready to strike. Putin was already in the office. When you look at the world map, you just realize that these 8 years, they were just one of the worst years because so many opportunities were missed. I'm not even. I don't want to mention the fact that Osama bin Laden could be killed a couple of times, at least a couple of times. Okay. But I think it was kind of negligence. Because America was so powerful. And again, maybe it's a human complacency. Maybe you say it was inevitable because nobody cared, because it was economy stupid. So just nobody wanted to think about global consequence. And, many bubbles were created, at that time. We remember the housing bubble, and some of the future financial bubbles, they were building up because people wanted to relax.
And then George W. Bush, if we could just walk through the U.S. presidents.
Look, during my book tour, I've been saying that, this is the U.S. foreign policy that was so consistent during the Cold War from Harry Truman to Ronald Reagan. Yes, there were differences, but within a range. Right. Because all presidents, Republicans and Democrats, they realized they had an existential enemy, and they had just to work, just to protect the United States and the free world. And they knew that it was their duty. And listening to the debates, for instance, I liked very much Nixon and Kennedy debates. You just understand that there were two great Americans, disagreeing on means, but agreeing on goals. So what's happened since '92? We had administrations that changed it quite dramatically, the foreign policy, and it was working more like a pendulum, swinging from one side to another. Clinton did very little, W did too much, Obama has been doing nothing. So it sent numerous messages across the world. And while people knew, in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s that, America was there, America was consistent, even if you have a change in Oval Office, one party replaced another, you could rely on the United States. America was behind American allies. Today, it's probably it's a springtime to be an American enemy. Because this administration, gives up everything to the enemies and betrays allies. And going back to George W. administration, it's very popular to criticize Bush today, Bush 43, especially for Iraq invasion. And I heard many voices, even within the Republican Party. Now, it's floating with the popular trend.
Right.
First of all, I have to say that as somebody who was born and raised in a communist country, I cannot criticize any action that led to the destruction of dictatorship. I think these people had wrong expectations when they saw the collapse of Saddam's dictatorship after American invasion of Iraq, and then the collapse of a few other dictatorships during the Arab Spring. They had expectations that next day it would be a democracy. Right. It's wrong. It was very naive because dictator succeeds in staying in power for so many years, not because he's a nice guy, who just helps his people, just to get out of poverty, because he's brutal, he's cruel. He succeeds in destroying opposition, first political opposition, then freedom of press, and remaining horizontal ties in the society, all the NGOs, anything that could represent not just a threat to him, but it's any sort of the slightest dissent.
Right.
No, it's kind of a political desert. What do you expect in desert, after 10, 20, 30, in case of Gaddafi, 42 years of dictatorship? So the end of dictatorship means there's a chance. And that was a chance in Iraq. Then we can talk about mistakes made by Bush administration. But again, we should not forget, while Clinton started his presidency, with America being all powerful, Bush had started his presidency with 9/11.
Right.
And it says, do we want to to evaluate his presidency as a success or failure? We should look at the 9/11 effect throughout his presidency. America was not attacked during Bush presidency, and yes, American soldiers fought wars outside of the United States, but again, they protected America. It was a war, but I think it's after the collapse of Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, people just lost lost the sense of borders.
Right.
It's a digital world, so they don't understand the wars can be fought way outside of the borders. And in this extent, to this, if we look at the terrorist threat to the United States, Bush administration was a success. Though, of course, again, I think, he failed to see the dangers of Vladimir Putin. He also, couldn't, rally European allies behind him. So, yeah, it was not, most efficient policy. But, yeah, compared to what's happened after him, yeah, I think that's we should probably give him, sort of A-.
No, and if you step back and just think the most fundamental question, if you were a radical Islamist, a terrorist, someone who wanted to kill Westerners and increase and have jihad succeed and increase, be found a caliphate, or you felt you were losing, I do believe, by November 2008 for all the mistakes of the Bush presidency. After the surge, you were on the retreat. You controlled nothing really. Now there are things we could all criticize about things Bush should have done in his second term, didn't do perhaps, and ways in which Rumsfeld didn't properly understand that you had to have a lot more troops in Iraq and enforce order and provide security. But I do think if you compare that to the beginning of the Bush presidency, we were at least in the right direction, and that certainly doesn't feel to be the case now.
Oh, absolutely, and we live in a world where perception often beats the reality, and I think it's the aura of the Iraqi war,
yeah,
and also the war in Afghanistan, and it created an image, again, the perception in the minds of millions and millions of Americans, and of course, people outside of the United States, that's they just don't understand, there were benefits of these wars, and one of them was that the radical Islamists, they were not defeated, but they were not as capable to attack the free world as they were in the year 2000 at the end of Clinton's second term.
Right, and if you look at Syria, staying out of war turned out to be a very good recipe for radical Islamists to recruit people in Europe and everywhere. Right?
But there's now, since you mentioned Syria and the current crises, I would probably use another chess metaphor, is that you can make a wrong move, you can even have a wrong plan, but the worst thing you can do is I made a mistake 6 moves ago, so how can I go back and just to rectify the mistake and maybe just to sort of change the direction. This is the best way to lose the game,
right?
Because you don't go back. It's even if you made a mistake. I mean, you have to stick with what you have now on the board and to move forward. Using your resources and just trying to come up with the best plan of what is available from what is available. So. Even if we disagree about the Iraq invasion in 2003 and the consequent moves made by Bush administration, Bush 43 administration, the decision of Obama administration to retreat, especially announcing it, this is the worst you can do. So, okay, it's at noon, at that day, that month, we are out. So by sending this signal to the radical Islamists, to the forces that were about just to recover and prepare again for attacks against the free world. I mean that was a recipe for disaster, and it created vacuum, and it's not a surprise that that we live in a world today that is much more dangerous place than in 2008. And it helped Vladimir Putin to regain his confidence, because after his attack against Georgia, Republic of Georgia in 2008 in August, he was basically rewarded by Obama-Clinton reset policy. Instead of paying a price for taking territory of a neighboring country. And of course, it helped terrorist groups to regroup, and of course, it helped Iran to gain so much power. So I can hardly imagine, that it's a Shah could dream, about total control of Iraq, and basically spreading the Shia influence across the region and becoming, the dominant power that it dwarfs Saudi Arabia and Gulf monarchies in the region.
I mean, a country that in 2009 had serious threats to the regime from the Iranian people, I think in part inspired, everyone makes fun of it now, inspired by the elections, the free elections in Iraq, and the sense that, gee,
Absolutely.
we can elect our leaders.
But that's another chess rule. You press your advantage. If you have a promising position, if you have an initiative, you have to press. You have to try to convert it into some kind of decisive factors that will help you to win the game. If you do nothing, if you retreat, so the initiative goes to your opponent, and then you will be on defensive. That's what happened.
And I suppose if it's poker, not chess, there's even the psychological effect of retreat and of showing an unwillingness to fight is even greater. Because in chess, presumably, if it's a tournament, you lose one game, but then it's a fresh start. But poker is more cumulative, might say.
But also, the reason I think this poker analogy it's much more sophisticated, because we're not talking about sort of equal military powers equal in strengths. So Iran,
right.
Come on, Assad. Even Russia today, it's a pale shadow of what was Soviet Union, especially under Stalin.
Yeah.
So, opposing Stalin in 1948, opposing Khrushchev during the Cuban Missile Crisis, confronting evil empire in early 80s. I mean, it was very different. And it's hearing that, Putin is so dangerous, we cannot confront him because, some terrible things could happen. Come on, just let's look back and understand what kind of challenges, other American presidents had to deal with during the Cold War. It's more about psychology. Because, it's when you look at this, for instance, Iranian deal. I mean, how on earth you can imagine that Iran would get everything, probably even more, that they could dream, in their, just it's in the wildest dreams, while just America, kept giving in on every demand, even before Iran could actually have the demand on the table. I think Kerry was ready to accept it.
Yeah, no, I want to come back. I want you to explain what happened in Russia. That's obviously something you were so close to. But you should write an article. This is the poker. I'm not too obsessed about the poker and chess thing, but I think you should write an article for Foreign Affairs magazine, some prestigious magazine that's read by the foreign policy establishment, called "It's Poker, Not Chess." It could be a famous article. It would be a sign. It would be like George Kennan. It will be a sign for decades to come. No, it's a very real insight. I do think also your point about the Cold War was more like chess in a way. Two big, somewhat even powers,
absolutely,
fairly stable chessboard, you might say.
Yeah,
so you could imagine they do this in Berlin and we do this here.
Absolutely. So there was a strategic game. Since '91, it was more of poker, because again, it's this America. Even today, is much more powerful than all the enemies combined. It's probably the first time, it's just after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that the forces of freedom, the free world, had overwhelming military and economic advantage. And also politically, it dominated the field, because even the worst dictatorships now, they're trying to pretend that they have elections. Right. And not pressing these advantages, looks just quite odd, because it again creates this vacuum, and also I think it affects ordinary people in these countries, whether it's Iran, Arab countries, Russia, because they used to look at America as a beacon of freedom and a country that stood firm defending the free world, and now just it's quite odd because it's America is there, but America is not there. So just it's and the whole stories about current political climate here and about elections. I mean, they're further eroding the reputation of the United States, and I think the damage caused by this administration to the prestige of the country and especially to the prestige of the presidency. I mean, this damage is it could take years to recover and to rebuild. It's easy to lose your reputation. It's easier to lose your friends, to lose their confidence, than to regain it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, let's talk about the 25 years in Russia. I mean, you watched that so closely, and it didn't have to happen this way. It wasn't inevitable.
The moment we say inevitable, it sounds a bit Marxist to me. So
Yes,
I'm always very cautious in claiming inevitability, and blaming it for
Right.
what's happened. Though of course, there were objective, reasons for Putin's rise. So going back to 91, 92, so I don't know whether we could demand from Yeltsin more than he did. But of course, now we understand that restarting Russia as a successor of the Soviet Union was a mistake. It was an easy and natural move, and I think everybody expected it. Because there were so many problems, during the collapse of the empire. You had, former Soviet republics turning to be independent states, and then you had financial issues. How are you going to deal with the currency and the Soviet property abroad and the debts, that's between the republics, and also about nuclear arsenal.
Weapons,
Yes.
yeah.
So you can hardly blame Yeltsin, the administration, by the way, being under pressure from Americans and Europeans to find simple solutions. Nobody thought long term. It was all about right now. Let's find a simple solutions. For instance, bring all the nukes to Russia. Ukraine is worried. Fine, we give them guarantees. Okay, guarantees. We know what's happened with these guarantees.
Right.
Budapest Memorandum, 1994. Ukraine gave up 2,000 nuclear warheads. 2,000 nuclear warheads, more than China, England, and France combined. Yes, in exchange for the guarantees from the United States and the UK. What's happened? They walked away from that. Then also again there were economic problems, and there was at that time, if I remember, there was very little help from the outside world because nobody knew what was happening in Russia, and everybody wanted to stay away. So there was a lot of moral support. Thank you, great. Some financial aid, but not. I think there was no strategic advice how to build institutions. Typically, following what Bush did, Bush 41 did with Gorbachev, putting all his eggs in this basket. Clinton administration put all the eggs in the Yeltsin's basket. So Americans wanted just to deal with one individual or just his administration, rather than getting involved in this. I wouldn't call nation building because Russia was, still capable country at that time, but helping to build institutions that could make Russia a long-term ally and friend of the United States.
State building, and
state building, yes, and I think,
building,
and one of the problems that we have not resolved at that time, and I believe it's absolutely vital for the future of my country if we want Russia to, to play a positive role in the world in the 21st century, is to reject its criminal past. The Soviet Union, had not become sort of foundation for free and democratic Russia. KGB is a criminal organization to be banned, and the crimes of KGB, whatever the name, because it changed many names,
right.
But it was still, an organization that aimed at destroying any dissent and protecting dictatorship in Russia. And it's not, this is not an accident, that since KGB was literally not touched in 91, 92, it had its revenge 8 years later.
Yeah,
with Vladimir Putin, KGB Lieutenant Colonel taking over Russian presidency. Also, I think it's the whole Soviet history, had to be revisited. So we could not rely on just on Soviet mythology about Stalin's role and winning the World War II. And Yeltsin did little. So again, he was too busy with economy, with just fixing this and that. And one of the turning points, was 1993, where the conflict with Yeltsin and the Supreme Soviet ended up with this, military clash in the streets of Moscow. Yeah, my sympathy was on Yeltsin's side, and I just, I think that's, he was right, and he was dealing with really bad guys. But, today I understand that it was not about protecting Yeltsin at all costs. What we had to do is to protect institutions at all costs. And the Yeltsin winning this, very, short, literally few days of civil war in the center of Moscow with this tank showdown, helped him to consolidate power. But he ended up with a Russian constitution that was not very democratic. So again, it was much better than the Soviet Union, but it already had seeds that helped Putin to become who he is today. The constitution assigned too much power to president, to president. And then, the next 7 years, Yeltsin has been sliding in this wrong direction. It was all about protecting his power and eventually protecting his family. In 1994, he started this war in Chechnya. Again, it's not unusual. Then the leader in trouble is looking for a small war, victorious war to boost his credentials. But that was the beginning of one of the worst disasters in post-Soviet history.
And it wasn't necessary.
Look, of course, if you look at Chechnya today with Putin's henchman Ramzan Kadyrov being in charge and having his private army, 25,000 of former, guerrilla now just wearing Russian uniform and used to kill people and they do nothing. It's just that they're terrorizing, not only people in Chechnya but across Russia. They are part of this business negotiations, Chechen style, and they have been used for murdering Putin's enemies outside of the country, and recently, Boris Nemtsov just in front of Kremlin. Right. And go back to General Dudaev. And Colonel Maskhadov, there's the first leaders of Chechen pro-independence movement in early 90s, and you look what they asked from Moscow, and what Kadyrov today got from Moscow, because basically Kremlin today has been paying ransom to Kadyrov just to keep them quiet, because this is the last element of Putin's remaining legacy. So he pacified Chechnya, and there's a peace in the Northern Caucasus. Though it's a huge price paid. I mean, Putin carpet bombed Chechen cities. He just erased Chechnya. So and instead of horrors of the first war, especially the second Chechen war already, and the Putin. Yeltsin could accept some of the relatively modest demands, short of independence. Yeah, maybe it was not, easy politically, but just, again, knowing what's happened afterwards, right. I mean, that definitely was a mistake. Not a huge mistake. And then 1996 elections. Again, I was on the Yeltsin side. We all were terrified by even the remote chance of communists coming back. But the best thing that Yeltsin could do at that time is probably, just to find a successor, because there were so many options in 1995, 1996. I remember one, for instance, academician Yuri Ryzhov. He was the head of Moscow Aviation Institute, one of the best intellectuals in Russia, one of the leaders of the democratic movement, an ambassador in France, and people like him could take over and win elections. 96, they could have won elections. The problem is that in 2000 it was already different, because just people were quite frustrated, and also they could feel that everything Yeltsin said and did was not necessarily in the favor of Russian people, but it was already it was more leaning towards the interest of oligarchy and Yeltsin's family. So that's why. While I'm still mourning the moment where Yeltsin sacked Boris Nemtsov, the first deputy prime minister at that time, and many believed his successor, and it's hard to imagine what would be, actually it's easy to imagine what would be Russia if Boris Nemtsov would be picked up as the Yeltsin successor, but Maybe in 98, 99 was already too late because there was a financial collapse and there was a huge a backlash. It's like the pendulum was swinging to the opposite side, and Yeltsin was looking for a strong man. And they came up with someone they thought they could control. As many times in history, many times before, this man who looked, just as sort of a good soldier that would follow, the orders and would protect the Yeltsin's family, protect the interests of Russian oligarchy. I mean, he turned to be the worst dictator. That's the worst choice that Russia Russia and Yeltsin could have made at that time.
And you don't buy the argument, or do you, that either EU expansion or NATO expansion, including the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, was sort of provoked Russia or legitimized a kind of nationalism in Russia in reaction against what they portrayed as at least a kind of anti-Russian alliance?
Now, I think it's quite annoying, just that there's so many people in the West, in the free world, in America or in Europe, they still use this argument.
Right.
I mean, it's an insulting argument for not just people in Ukraine who have been suffering immensely over the last few years, fighting for freedom, fighting just for just to be independent. Right. They're dying for the show. They're ready to die by defending their freedom. But it's also about, what about smaller nations, Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, who suffered terribly under Soviet occupation for decades. Now, if not today for NATO membership that included Baltic states, who doubts Russian tanks will be rolling over streets, Tallinn, Riga, and Vilnius? What about Poles? Yeah, they also suffered immensely, by being attacked by Hitler and by Stalin, and then, just living under Soviet occupation for more than 40 years. So what about them? So just denying their rights to be protected by NATO, being part of Europe, I mean, that would probably, it's just make this conflict even worse, because Putin would have not stopped short of using this advantage. I think, to the contrary, that in the 90s, there was in U.S. policy toward Russia, there was too much of carrot, and there's almost no stick. There were so many things that could be achieved if America had a plan, vision, and strengths. Few people remember that the beginning of Iranian nuclear program, and the first moment where American president addressed his Russian counterpart about this potential problem was in 1995. That was the beginning of Russian transfer of nuclear technology to Iran. The United States Congress had a bipartisan resolution, authorizing President Clinton, to raise the issue with Yeltsin, and, if necessary, to cut financial aid, which was absolutely crucial at that time, if Russia would refuse to halt these transfers. Clinton, he just had a press conference with Yeltsin. Yeltsin, laughed, hugged Clinton. Clinton laughed. So he decided that it was not so important for U.S. national security, and it could jeopardize reforms in Russia. So the same language. So also we can look at North Korea, 1994. So in 1994, Clinton administration signed this nuclear deal, that propped up the North Korean regime, the worst dictatorship on the planet these days, saved them, from probably imminent collapse. And now, 22 years later, they have the nukes, they have the missiles, and they're still in power. So, and I could start counting, this moment after moment. I think that is the reason Putin, believed that he could go anywhere, whether it's Ukraine, Syria, or you name it. It's because he saw nothing but weakness.
Right. I was struck reading your book too, your account. It was also articles you've written, speeches you've given. What it's like in Russia today? I don't think people really. I was discussing foreign policy with someone, and I said, well, we have to stand up to dictators. And I actually made the point you made earlier that others have made. I'm certainly no expert on this. I mean, we underestimate, in fact, how important Putin is, I think, to the alliance of dictators around the world. As you say, he's at the center of the spider web. But also, someone said to me, well, he's not really a dictator. You know, he's been elected, and Medvedev was there, and, you know, yeah. And there's still some freedom of association and press, but I think Americans do not understand, and I probably don't either, sort of what the actual state of dictatorship is in Russia today.
It's a full-blown one-man dictatorship. There are some windows of democracy that Putin uses and his propaganda uses just to preserve the image of Putin still being, you know, a democratic leader. It's quite important because unlike Stalin's dictatorship or, you know, old-style Chinese dictatorship, the modern dictators, they have very close ties with the free world.
Yeah.
Just having these connections, you know, having access to financial markets, to new technologies, so building this, you know, political and you know, cultural ties, you know, creates an illusion. It helps them, you know, both ways. One, you know, just it keeps him, you know, Putin in this case, you know, in the loop. And Putin's propaganda machine used most effectively the fact that Putin, for many years, was the member of G8. I couldn't even pronounce G8 because, you know, G7 was, you know, the 7 great industrial democracies and the group of 7 great industrial democracies. And I didn't think that Russia, you know, fit to be part of that. But it was also, by the way, an advance payment to Yeltsin. It's again come in, you know, and then with, you know, expecting that Russia would become, you know, sort of its full-blown democracy, you know, that could play by the same rules. By the way, you know, China was never invited.
Right.
It's a much more powerful economy, or India for the sake of argument. But it was Russia because there were very high expectations. But again, Putin took it for granted. He kept taking things from leaders of the free world without giving anything back. And 2006 was sort of a climax where Putin was a chair. You know, the year that Russia had a chair seat in so-called G8, G7 plus 1, and in St. Petersburg, Putin had a massive sort of propaganda coup that was that was all over the place in Russia. And how could, whether it's me or Boris Nemtsov or whoever, how we could convince even those Russians who were sympathetic to our cause that Putin was not a Democrat. Right. If he was there, you know, chairing the meeting with Bush, Blair, Berlusconi, I think already Merkel. Yeah, it's this Chirac. This is a picture, you know. It's and a picture, and also 1,000 words. And we were trying to warn people about the potential threats of Putin dictatorship.
So is Putin, is it fair to call him a dictator? We've got elections, and there seems to be some press and civil society and so forth.
Oh, it happened before in human history. Then eventual dictators have been elected. You know, right. In the first place, starting with Adolf Hitler. Yeah, just to describe Putin's rule. I think we should try to actually use certain analogy with a normal democratic country, the United States. So number one, Putin never participated in single debates in his life. That's one of the first things Putin did in year 2000 after becoming Russian president. Of course, he restored Soviet anthem. Very important, by the way, message, what I could do if given the chance. But after Russian nuclear submarine Kursk, sank, what he did, he eliminated live television in Russia. So since year 2000, there is no live television in Russia.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So you don't
No, it's
There's
just
no breaking
there's
news.
no, only 9 o'clock in the news is some of the news, but it's just totally controlled by
Right.
Kremlin. But otherwise, that's it. That's it. It's
No
all
news
recorded.
no news channel.
No, it's
no.
recorded.
Uh-huh.
So that's. Then when people say, "Oh, he was elected," but election is not just it's just a one day when you actually cast your ballot. Election is a complicated process. Actually casting the ballot is like sort of the climax of this process, but it's a very complicated process. It starts with registered political party. You cannot do it in Russia today, so unless you have Kremlin's consent. Raising funds, welcome. So you will never see a penny. So because everybody knows the moment you support, any opposition. By the way, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the richest man in Russia, in year 2003, it was not even challenging the regime, that he just had some ambitions of being independent. The most successful Russian company in 2003. So the richest man, 10 years in jail. So that was a message, just to understand that you can't even think about challenging the decisions made in Kremlin. It's like here, if you want an American parallel, it's administration, say Bush administration. So destroying Microsoft and just putting Bill Gates in jail because he's supporting Democrats. So it's impossible. But those are the realities. And by the way, we're talking about 2003, 2004, 2005. So dictatorship, doesn't happen overnight. This is not something it's a coup. No, Putin dictatorship, as by the way many others, again going back to Hitler or even Stalin, it was just grabbing here and there a little bit. So just it's not actually sending the warning signs. And just every day you discover you have a little bit of less freedom here and there. And Putin knew that, he had to offer something to Russian people, just to make them feel comfortable while he was in the process of amputating one piece of freedom after another. And he was very lucky. Oil prices jumped. So he got cash. I mean, Russia never had so much cash available, I don't know, since Tsarist time. And Putin was quite generous in just paying it and just, creating also this sense of satisfaction. People, Russian middle class that just appeared out of blue. Unlike in the tumultuous 90s under Yeltsin, people, could think about the future. They could make, just some plans. They could travel abroad. They had decent lives. So they liked it. They thought maybe this is democracy. Maybe this is something that we should support. And at the same time, Putin gradually, destroyed any opposition, any groups of opposition that could potentially. Be challenging. Well, in 2005, I've ended my professional chess career and moved in what people very generously call politics in Russia. The most popular question I was asked is whether chess, my chess knowledge, my chess experience, was helpful in navigating in these rough waters, just again Russian politics. And my answer was it was not, because in chess we have fixed rules, clear rules, and unpredictable results. In Putin's Russia is exactly the opposite. So results stays the same while rules are constantly change.
Right.
And you mentioned Medvedev, the name that probably the young Americans already forgot, and for the good reason, because it's a shadow. So it was a fake. It was another covert operation, but a very successful one.
Yes, I agree.
Putin, and as every dictator who managed to stay in power for so long, I mean, he had great animal instincts. He knew where he could press, or where he had just to make a waiting move. So just not to press his luck. He knew that in 2007, 2008, it would be too dangerous for him to actually go against Russian constitution to change it and stay, for the third term, because that would be, that would send a message that he's, about his plans. By the way, maybe, again, it's hard to argue now whether it was doable or not. But in 2007, 2008, he could have walked away. probably paying off the Khodorkovsky and the Yukas, and sort of settling some old scores. And he had so much money, so much influence. He could probably buy International Olympic Committee, to become the president there.
Right.
So he could have a comfortable life. The very fact that he decided to stay as technically number 2 guy, but of course, as a puppet master pulling all the strings, for me, it was an unmistakable sign.
Yeah.
He's there for life. Amazingly, Americans, Europeans, they looked at Medvedev, at Putin's puppet, as a savior, as somebody they could work with, as somebody who could, one day revolt against Putin. The shadow doesn't revolt against its master, and Medvedev proved it. All he did is just, enlarged the presidential term, so from 4 to 6 years, and he basically brought Putin back in 2011, announced that he would not run, and his boss, would go back to Kremlin, while he would stay as a prime minister. But again, he could be prime minister, he could be whoever. So it's all about Putin's comfort. And again, Putin knew that Medvedev was important because he represented so-called liberal wing, and Putin was always very good in creating this balance between so-called liberals. When I say liberals in Russia, we use this word for pro-Western affiliation, and the guys on the security side. At the end of the day, they're all doing the same job because Hitler also had some guys, Stalin, that did, important things for economy, just, to make sure that the country was functioning. And the guys who did, the police work, they just had to conduct the dirty jobs. So Putin always knows how to keep this balance. Even today, he still has these guys around him because he knows that those are very good in just in killing people and just dispersing demonstrations and doing the police job. They will not be very good in keeping his economy afloat, especially at the time of the low oil prices. And in 2012, Putin came back, and it was quite an amazing moment that. When President Obama met, at that time yet President Medvedev, and sending him a message that I will be more flexible.
After his election.
After my re-elections,
and making fun of Mitt Romney for saying in the campaign that Russia was a great threat, right?
Yes. Actually, Romney said Russia was was a number 1 geopolitical foe. And Romney was right. The problem with the statement was that Romney didn't believe in it. For Romney, it was a figure of speech. Right. Romney wanted to attack Obama. And Obama trashed him. And you could see that Romney didn't know how to respond.
Right.
There was no passion. When Reagan said evil empire, he believed in it.
Right.
And it's when American presidents were Truman or Kennedy, where they just stood against Soviet Union, they believed in it. They knew it was something so important that they had to take risk. For Romney, it was just it was a soundbite, and he didn't know how to play with this when Obama aggressively pushed him back. But for Putin, this message, it was like a carte blanche, move on, do whatever you want. So this is, and I think that's at that time Putin already knew that he could go to Ukraine or other places.
Right? Yeah.
And, I don't want to find an excuse for Putin's or Hitler's of this world, but the problem is that they always take this kind of statements as a weakness and basically an invitation to continue. Hitler never believed that England or France would go into war for Poland because they gave up Czechoslovakia. And in his mind, what was the difference? Czechoslovakia, Poland, it's in the east of Europe, it's not for you. Why now? What's the point? Right. Same with Putin. Georgia and message that he sent many times. Actually, George W. also heard this message and he didn't react. Putin repeatedly said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster. And also, many times, he repeated that Russia had special rights for the so-called near abroad.
Right.
Yeah, the sphere of influence. This is the way Putin saw and still sees, the world. It's like, the 19th, early 20th century map, with big powers, the tsars, the monarchs, just pushing the weaker nations. And it's all about like a concert of great nations. There's few big nations that could negotiate. Right. So in Putin's mind, it's Russia and America. So that's why he always addresses America. And Russian propaganda is pretending that it's not the war in Ukraine. It's Ukraine is America's proxy. Right. So that's why we're fighting America there. So it's not Erdogan. Erdogan is American puppet. So it's this. He did it because he was ordered by the White House. And no matter what America does, no matter how many messages about flexibility America sends, no matter how many concessions America makes, no matter how many treaties it signs, it still remains a number one enemy because, again, for Putin, is the only enemy, it's worth having. To look strong, he must have a strong enemy. Right. And as long as America remains preeminent, it will be a number one target for every, revisionist power, for every dictator, for every terrorist group. And this is a big mistake that has been made by not just this administration, but I think many Americans who simply don't understand that, if your country is unique, if it's exceptional, if you believe in American exceptionalism, it has a price. You will be number one target.
Right.
And unless you understand it, you will be paying price because, you want to be exceptional and you want to be loved. It's not easy. So I was a world champion for a long time, and trust me, this is,
right.
It is a lot of admiration, but also this is hard feelings. Yes, but in this case, it's a policy. It's a conscious policy on the enemies of the free world to preserve America's status as a number one target, because that's what makes them feel good, feel strong, and that's why they keep their subjects, those they govern, sort of under their thumbs.
And I think the use of phrases like sphere of influence in the near abroad, which I assume they have Russian antecedents, but also very effective over here for the foreign policy establishment, which is full of people who never like the overly universalistic, democratic human rights rhetoric of Bush, and maybe there were some criticisms that were fair, but they didn't think that that didn't seem subtle enough and sophisticated enough, and they loved Kissinger and spheres of influence and geopolitics. And I think in a way Putin was very clever in, I don't know how much he intended this, but he sort of gave the foreign policy establishment a way to pretend to understand to understand and sympathize with what he was doing. So when he invaded Ukraine, it was, well, you've got to understand it's, Crimea and history and this and that, and everything gets explained away,
it's this. He knows that there's a huge crowd on both sides of Atlantic that will be willing. It's always willing to accept his arguments. It's just he throws, a little bit of food here and there, and they all just, they're ready to bite it. Crimea, it's just, God's sake, it's just, it's the first case of annexation of the territory of a neighboring country in Europe since 1945. Actually, in the world, is the second one after Saddam Hussein, Kuwait.
Right.
And we're still, talking about it as if maybe there were some arguments, maybe in a kind of historical truth. This is, something that, this is the young people should understand. The moment they hear historical, quote unquote, historical arguments in the geopolitics, look for trouble. There are rules, regulations, treaties, agreements. We live in a world where you cannot appeal to history. Because where do you start it, So it's especially in Europe, especially in the Middle East, in America it's probably easier because you have 400 years, as more or less it's clear. So, but you go to the continents where some places will just change hands dozens of times, and you don't know. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So that's why, since 1945, the decision was made, that nobody touches the borders.
Right.
And what Putin did, and that's one of these greatest, you may call it, contribution to the chaos in the world, he run away from this consensus. And it's like opening Pandora box.
And what was the key moment, do you think? '08 with Georgia, or?
I think it's not only Georgia, but it's general weakness. Georgia was a test.
Yeah.
So, and as he realized that, he could get away with that.
But I think if you think, Bush reacted fairly okay,
Fairly,
maybe to Georgia.
but he was already.
McCain pushed him, and McCain was in the campaign, and then McCain was ridiculed. People forget this in '08 for saying we are Georgians. Maybe it was a little bit of an overstatement, but Obama ridiculed him, and then Obama takes over. I've always thought this was underestimated as an important moment. And they announced the reset with Russia.
Yes.
The same government, the same country that invaded a neighboring country that was incidentally a pretty decent country and a friendly country to us and a pretty democratic country, that had invaded it just 6 months before. That's a pretty astonishing message if you think about that.
Actually this moment was the beginning of this we call sunshine policy of this current administration that continued for so many years, and it has destroyed the trust between American allies and the countries like Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, a tiny country that believed in America, believed in America's intentions, good intentions, in supporting freedom and democracy, and believed that if you play by the rules, if you build your country based on the common values of the free world, you will be helped one way or another.
Right.
And we could see just around the world that America is on retreat, and it becomes so natural for all these dictators and thugs and terrorists just to grab the territory if it's being vacated. The vacuum doesn't survive for too long, so it's immediately being filled. And in case of the Middle East, it was filled by Russia, by Iran, by Islamic State, by other terrorist groups. And the vacuum in the foreign policy in the United States of coherent, long-term planning, comprehensive foreign policy, or in Europe, has been filled by the populist demands. People just lost the track. They see no connection between foreign policy and domestic affairs. That's how which is quite ironic, because at the time when we live in a world that's getting smaller and smaller, because of all these great technologies, devices that, by the way, invented in our world,
right.
in the free world, that we can learn everything about the most remote parts of the world, what's happened there, so whether bad or good. At this time, people just don't realize that, their, success, domestic success, just their jobs, the financial security, they depend very much on the role that this great country plays in global affairs. You cannot expect to get benefits from trade, from finance, from very mobile labor market, pretending that you are no longer interested in global affairs. I'm also not happy with these tired premises of the United States, being global policeman. I think it's a wrong concept, because you should not talk about a policeman who is just walking his old beat, and shooting or carpet bombing, occasionally bad guys. It's about leadership,
right.
Global leadership, which, by the way, includes policing.
Yeah.
But global leadership is more. It's about showing the vision. This is something that is so badly needed, because, again, you offer nothing. You try to stick with status quo. This vacuum, the ideological vacuum, will be filled by bad guys. Why you have so many young boys from well-off families, from Europe, from Australia, New Zealand, this country, going abroad, joining ISIS, because there's always a tendency, just to, for young people to, fight for something new, something different.
Yeah.
And unless we right. offer our vision, we'll keep losing. We'll keep losing this battle, and this is something that that helps Putin and alike to sort of dominate global agenda, because we are not just on retreat. We are we're trying to preserve status quo, and we offer no vision, long-term vision, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead of time. that's what could be done by the United States, because this country, has a history. By the way, it 20th century was the American century. It has values that are so are vital for success. Free market, religious liberty. It's openness, and these values that attracted people to the United States. That's when I was a kid, and when I grew up on the other side of the Iron Curtain, and ignoring them, just trying to abandon them, trying to pretend that you could be just in just another country. It hurts free will, and it hurts the United States. Every country, every individual, has his or her role, and walking away from the role that is designed for you by destiny is just it's self-destructive.
No, well, for what it's worth, I very strongly agree with that. It was during the Bush years. I mean, Bush overstated it a little bit, the end of tyranny and all that, but all the critics were showing how clever they were by showing that, history's more complicated. You can't just always, there's a tension sometimes between interests and values, as if everyone doesn't know that. And they totally, in my view, underestimated the importance of that big vision, both in terms of helping people we wanted to help around the world and helping the American people understand what we were doing in a bigger way than having to say this intervention here and that one there and this helping these Democrats here. And you need people to have a bigger sense of it. And I think it was important internally in terms of morale and feeling that the country was about something bigger than just, having the GDP go up 2% from, year to year.
Yes, but I think the GDP growth was much higher than 2% when America played.
Well, that's true too.
Yes,
there was no tension.
Played
really.
a different role. Yes,
right.
The things are connected, and then we are now just seeing this. I think it's like an identity crisis.
Yeah.
And the Trump and Sanders, for me, it's like just two sides of the same coin. Is they are more like just reflections of this crisis, because a lot of people they need a vision, and unless there's the global vision that is coming from the mainstream, something that is based on the values that made this country great and helped us to build the dominance of the free world around the globe. So unless this vision is available, again, there's no vacuum. Somebody else will come with either with very nationalist, xenophobic ideas, or with the siren songs of socialism.
I mean, it is amazing. We're talking in April of 2016, and Donald Trump's leading the Republican field, Bernie Sanders trailing Hillary Clinton by a little bit. Half the voters, basically, more or less, going for either an authoritarian who sympathizes with Putin or a socialist who went on his honeymoon to the Soviet Union. It is after America wins the Cold War and after the basic principles of liberal democracy and of American democracy are vindicated, one would think, by looking around the world, right? I mean, it's kind of an unbelievable moment.
Promoting the book, my latest one, This Winter is Coming, I crossed this country and just visited many places, universities, different kind of, met different kind of crowds, East Coast, Midwest, West Coast, and, addressing young crowds, so I just had a sense that just for many of them, the Soviet Union was, it's as remote as ancient Greece. It's the history of the Cold War. I think it's unless you are talking to a crowd that lived through. So, but for just not for millennials, and even just for people that in their mid-30s, it's something that had no relevance.
Right.
For who we are today. Right. So, and having this kind of break, sort of in historical memory, I think just it creates sort of a perverted vision of the modern world. So it's very important that we recover this historical knowledge. We just understand what's happened and why it's still relevant. It's the Cold War was not won by accident. It's not just was won because the economic superiority or military might. That was important, of course, but it's also values.
Yeah.
That's the values that were in the foundation of this country, but also the values that that attracted so many people around the world. And right now, it seems that it's Americans are looking, not typically for Americans, looking for oversimplistic solutions. So we just believe that we could have our low-paid jobs back to the United States. I mean, but unless you address people with your vision, explaining them that it's 21st century, and in 21st century you should not look back. You should analyze what you did right, what you did wrong, but you should look in the future and being a leader. So as Harry Truman said in 1951, by the way, answering Obama, 60 years earlier, we cannot lead the forces of freedom from behind. This is America's role.
Yeah,
so
that's amazing.
It's and we heard it, and it was in different forms repeated by many presidents. So there's so many things that can be done. And by the way, there's still, this is America, even with all, these negatives, that's in economy and in political life, it's still, in the driving seat of innovations. It's still the most vibrant economy in the world. Though, of course, when you look at the numbers, it's I think it's the first time America dropped, from top 10 of the countries that had the the most comfortable countries for doing business, which is quite amazing. So that's surprisingly the only country that is in top 10 from the Western Hemisphere is Chile.
Wow. So the history of foreign observers coming to America, living in America, or just visiting America from Tocqueville on, they've often been perceptive about America in a way that if you grow up here, it's a little harder to see it. So, let's talk about that just for a few minutes, maybe to conclude. When did you first come to America? I don't even know. Was it
first time? I remember it was February 1988. Actually, it was my first trip across the ocean. I was already the world champion. We played a World Blitz Championship in Canada, in St. John. So it's in the north. And then I visited New York. It was my first trip. And I had many trips in 88, 89, 1990. So, and of course, I played in New York regularly. So
Sure.
I played in 1995, the World Championship match was Vishwanathan Anand from India. We played on the top of the World Trade Center,
Right.
having the first game opened by Mayor Giuliani on September 11.
Is that right?
Yes, September 11, 1995.
At the top of the World Trade Center?
Yes, on the 107th floor we played there.
So about America, what would be your sense? What do we underestimate or overestimate, or what?
I
do
saw
we
a
miss?
tremendous change because we saw what America did, and just under Ronald Reagan, it liberated the world. So that's again the way that we saw it, and I saw a lot of changes. For instance, New York, since I visited America first time, even from early 90s, changed quite dramatically. So at that time, West Side in Manhattan, Upper West Side was not, the
most
place where to live. Yes. Now I live at the Upper West
Side. I grew
Side.
up there, but I accept the point.
Yes,
right?
this is, and it's a great neighborhood,
Right.
So. We could see these tremendous changes under Mayor Giuliani in New York. Again, we all celebrated, the end of communism, and so this is the years of Clinton administration. And again, it's a rosy time, so just let's enjoy it. I have to say that I didn't have much time just to to reflect all these changes. Now I'm thinking about it, and as a professional chess player, I just have to back to analyze it, and I think that. Whether it was inevitable or not. So we go back to the same, the same point. It was very difficult for Americans, after the hardship of the Cold War. not to lose the sense of urgency of rebuilding the world. So it's though again, America did a great job, just in helping the world just to be shaped as it is now. When you look at every device that we're carrying in our pockets or purses, and technologies, and it's still, it's not made in the USA. It's almost like a made in China, but it's conceived and invented in the USA. It still remains, the most attractive country for immigrants, talented, those who are looking for a chance to succeed. But every country, even as great as America, should should look look in the mirror and should reinvent itself, because time changes. Time changes. Our institutions must change, but our values must not. Right. So this is, and based on the values that made this country great, I think it's time to, look in the mirror and just to start, reinventing the country, going back to, to the notion of risk, sacrifice. This is something that is so vital. It's embedded in the nature of capitalism. Recognizing that it's a success of the country, it's a success of the nation, it's a success of the free world, which could be a failure of an individual or a group of individuals, but unless we try, just to recover this spirit, this spirit of capitalism, the spirit of freedom, the spirit of the free market, with these values of risk and sacrifice, I think we'll be doomed, just to become hostages of the political populists who are trying to offer us solutions that already failed. My response to Bernie Sanders, stories, fairy tales, is that the failure of capitalism is still much better than success of socialism. Because we know that. Right. I don't think that it's we have to respond to Donald Trump, because again we know what happens where people become addicted to this primitive philosophy that it's like a drug. It offers you a little bit of comfort and under illusions, but eventually you pay dearly for your attempt to escape reality.
And you've spoken on a lot of college campuses in this recent book tour for Winter is Coming.
Yes,
what's your sense of? I'm just curious. I mean, one always hopes the next generation.
It depends, of course, on the institutions. But obviously, most of the colleges, they are leaning left, and because the academics there, there's the teachers. They, I think they are selling not selling. They are presenting the vision of the world that is outdated. That's nothing to do with reality. So I'm also affiliated with Oxford. I'm senior visiting fellow of Oxford Martin School, so I just spend a few days a year there, and I can tell you that it's the atmosphere in Britain, in Oxford campus. It's quite different from many similar institutions in terms of stature and prestige in the United States. It's far more cosmopolitan. It's far more it's more open. It's inclusive. Here is just, I think that's the often in the campus in campus in the United States you could see a very aggressive reaction, because it's like an attempt to cover your sort of the lack of intellectual arguments by ideological stubbornness. So that's this, and again, I hope there will be more debate. That's what I wanted to achieve by promoting my book. It's Winter is Coming. It's not just a warning, but it's also a story. It's you read. You may disagree, but go back to the debates. Again, this is a very important part of American culture, debate. Because, we mentioned the Nixon-Kennedy debate, and you also just told me about, the Reagan-Carter debate. There were debates. Today we don't have debates. They're not listening to each other. It's all about sound bites. It's about debates where the country could actually find what's the best way to move forward. And it's very important that the political class will not argue about goals. We'll disagree about the means, but the goals will remain the same as the values. And hopefully we'll see just the recovery of the political class, but it's also depends on the mainstream. So it's all things are connected.
Right.
So that's why the young generation should learn more about history of the United States and get to be proud of this history.
Right.
It's just this is not just it's a book or many books written by some people that and the book have nothing to do with our life today. No, we have to learn from these books. We have to learn from the history, and based on this knowledge, based on this on these achievements and accomplishments of the founding fathers, of the forebears in the United States, we have to move in the future.
Well, I hope this conversation encourages people to read your book and other writings of yours, and read generally American history and serious debates. I couldn't agree more. I mean, real debates in political philosophy and understanding history, and really trying to the conceit today is that the universities has never been more open, forward-looking, et cetera. It's the opposite, right? I mean,
it is the opposite.
There's nothing open about being totally blinkered in the way you think about history in the world.
Yes. Challenging First Amendment, just
not a good, not a high watermark for American history.
Yes.
Anyway, so thank you so much for participating in this conversation, Garry.
Thank you, Bill, for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us on Conversations.